So, if you've ever tried to read the Quran, you might have had this strange experience. You see all these names you know Moses, Abraham, Mary, even Jesus. But their stories, well, they just feel a little bit off, right? It's like listening to someone tell a story you know really well, but they keep getting the details wrong. It can be super confusing. So, yeah, let's get into that puzzle.
And this is the question, isn't it? It trips up so many people. And look, it's a totally natural reaction. You see these stories you recognize, but they're broken up, the details are different, the whole moral emphasis has shifted. It is so easy to just conclude that the Quran is making a bunch of mistakes. But what if? What if that's the wrong way to even think about it?
Exactly. What if what looks like a simple error to us with our modern way of thinking is actually a really deliberate, consistent, and powerful method of telling a story? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to explore that method and see that the Quran isn't trying and failing to be the Bible. It's playing a completely different game.
To really get this, we kind of have to take a step back from our modern world. Today, we're totally obsessed with originality, and we think of sacred books as these finished objects, sitting on a shelf behind glass. But in the ancient world, it wasn't like that at all. Sacred stories were alive. They were dynamic. People were constantly retelling them and reinterpreting them to find new meaning.
And this is such a key difference. When you and I think about commentary, we think of footnotes, right? Or maybe an analysis that sits outside the main text, explaining it. But this ancient interpretive retelling was way bolder. It went right inside the story. It would add new dialogue, it would clarify why a character did something, it would reshape your whole narrative to make a really strong theological point.
The Jewish tradition actually has a name for this whole practice. It's called Midrash. And it's this really beautiful idea that a story isn't just about what happened, it's about what it means. Midrash is basically the art of preaching a story by retelling it. It's like turning a diamond around in the light to see all the different ways it can sparkle. This is the key concept we're going to need. So let's take this lens, this idea of interpretive retelling, and actually apply it to the Quran. Because when we do that, what looked kind of random and messy before suddenly starts to look really, really deliberate. You start to see the patterns.
The Quran uses a few of these techniques over and over again. It'll break stories into little pieces to preach a specific theme. It expands dialogue to make a moral point super clear. It does this fascinating thing called prophetic rehabilitation. And get this, it even uses silence as a powerful form of commentary. Let's zoom in on a couple of these. So, prophetic rehabilitation. Here's the thinking. In the Quran's worldview, prophets are supposed to be like crystal clear signposts to God. But if that prophet's personal life is messy or morally questionable, well, the sign gets cloudy, right? The message gets lost. So the Quran recalibrates their stories to protect the messenger, just to make sure that moral lesson comes through loud and clear. And this table just shows it perfectly. I mean, take Aaron. In the Bible, he's the guy who builds the golden calf. It's a disaster. In the Quran, he's protected from that heir. Or King Solomon. The Bible portrays him as a womanizer with hundreds of wives. The Quran clears him of that accusation. Lot's story doesn't end in that infamous, shameful episode. You see what's happening? The Quran isn't trying to clean up history for no reason. It's making sure these figures can do their job, which is to be unambiguous moral guides. Just as important as what the Quran says is what it doesn't say. It retells the story of the Exodus from Egypt a bunch of times, but it never, not once, mentions the killing of Egypt's firstborn children. It tells the story of Abraham's great test, but it very carefully avoids saying that God explicitly ordered him to kill his own son. These are not oversights. They're powerful theological arguments being made through silence.
Okay, but this next part might be the most compelling piece of the entire puzzle. The Quran has stories and little details about biblical figures that are not in the Bible at all. But you can find them in the huge body of Jewish and Christian interpretive literature that was circulating at the time. Let's just take one perfect case study, the story of Cain and Abel. In Genesis, Cain kills Abel, and then the text just moves on. It's totally silent on how the first human being ever was buried. But in later Jewish Midrash, this amazing little detail pops up. God sends a raven, which scratches at the ground to teach Cain how to dig a grave. And guess what very specific, non-biblical detail appears in the Quran? The raven. This is basically a smoking gun. It shows the Quran is engaging not just with the biblical text, but with the living, breathing conversation about that text.
And this is not a one-off thing. That classic story of a young Abraham smashing his father's idols, not in the Bible, but it's central to Jewish Midrash, and it's right there in the Quran.
The story of Mary's childhood in the temple? Absent from the Gospels, but it's a huge deal in early Christian writings that didn't make it into the Bible, like the Proto-Evangelium of James. And again, it's a central part of the Quran's story of Mary. The pattern is just undeniable. So, what does all this mean? It means we need to totally reframe how we think about the relationship between these two books. The Quran doesn't see itself as correcting a faulty text. It sees itself as confirming a sacred history and then stepping in to clarify its ultimate final meaning. You know, a pretty good way to think about it is like a shared narrative universe. Think the Marvel movies. When a new Captain America movie comes out, it doesn't have to retell his origin story every single time. It just assumes you know the basics. It confirms the character is who you think he is, and then it revisits his story from a new angle to explore a new theme. This is almost exactly how the Quran operates. It steps right into the biblical world, it confirms all the major players, and it assumes you already know who they are. Then, it retells their stories to make one single, overriding point with absolute razor-sharp clarity: the uncompromising oneness of God and the need for human beings to submit to Him.
And this really gets to the core of it. When we see a difference between the Quran and the Bible, we're not looking at a factual error. We are witnessing an argument. The Quran isn't trying to be a copy. It's claiming to be the definitive, authoritative interpretation.
And this just shifts the entire conversation. The debate is no longer about who has the better memory or who has the more accurate ancient manuscript. It's a much deeper and, frankly, a much more interesting debate about who has the authority to tell us what these sacred stories truly mean.
And that's really the lens this whole framework gives us. It helps us move past these simple accusations of error and gets us into the heart of a profound theological claim. It invites us to read not just for what's different, but for why it's different, and maybe to finally understand one of history's most influential books on its own terms.